Hello, it is March 29th, 2024, and this is Political Dharma with Alan Zundel. This week, my stories include that independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has presented his running mate, the vice presidential candidate, Nicole Shanahan, and the American Values 2024 Super PAC that's been supporting his campaign independently. The co-founder of that announced in a speech that they intend for the organization to persist for years into the future in order to carry Kennedy's campaign forward. The state of Nevada is refusing to accept signatures that the Kennedy campaign gathered in order to get on the ballot in that state, and attacks on Kennedy from various sources, not various sources, from various directions, all presumably from the same source right now, the Democratic Party, seem to be escalating. And then finally, Claudia De La Cruz, the presidential candidate of the Party of Socialism and Liberation, got on the ballot in yet another state. So, before I start in those stories, I'll remind those of you who have been listening and tell those of you who are new to the show that I recently had thumb surgery, which means that I'm doing everything with my left hand and might have trouble with some of the transitions to graphics and things like that. So please give me a little allowance and bear with me if I run into embarrassing mistakes. I'm having the cast off next week, but it'll take time to go through physical rehab for this hand. And I need to practice using my left hand because this is the way it's going to be going forward, at least for a few weeks. But let's get into the first story, which is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on Tuesday in Oakland, California, he presented his new presidential pick, Nicole Shanahan. She's a 38-year-old lawyer, raised in relatively poor circumstances, but went through college, got her law degree, then began working to apply computer technology, data processing, I guess, to the management of patents. I'm not sure exactly what that entails, but it makes her sound like she had a specialization. She started her own company in that field, and then she married a very rich man, one of the co-founders of Google. They divorced subsequently, and reportedly she had a settlement in the hundreds of millions of dollars, so she has a lot of money. She is the woman who helped develop and put the money into the Super Bowl ad for Kennedy that ran, several weeks ago, and she was his pick for vice president. So that rally last Tuesday to present her to the public was kind of long. They had a number of speakers, and then Kennedy came out and spoke for quite a while, it seemed to me at least, and the crowd also looked a little fatigued by the time they brought her out on the stage, but she did perk up people. There seemed to be some excitement generated when she gave her speech. So I have about 5 minutes of short clips from her half-an-hour-long speech, and I'm going to present them to you now so you can get a flavor of what she had to say.
I want to tell you a little bit about my childhood so you can understand the source of my politics and convictions. My mother's first job when she came to the United States in 1983 was as a live-in caretaker to an elderly woman here at Lake Merritt. By the time I was born, she worked as a dental office secretary. My father loved my brother and I dearly, but he was very troubled, plagued by substance abuse, and he struggled to keep a job. From watching my father and his struggles, I learned not to be judgmental. He was doing the best he could. I think of him when I see the statistics of the millions of Americans who are addicted, depressed, or suffering. This is one of the epidemics of our time. It affects nearly every American family. I don't think we would have made it without food stamps and government help. My mom worked hard, but it wouldn't have been possible to keep it together without that help. As you probably know, I became very wealthy later on in life, but my roots in Oakland taught me many things I have never forgotten. That the purpose of wealth is to help those in need. That's what it's for. And I want to bring that back to politics too. That is the purpose of privilege. El Salvador is where I came to understand war, but more importantly is where I also came to understand peace. That is what inspired me to my first political action in high school. At the onset of the Iraq War, I became an anti-war activist. So these are two of my political convictions I hold today: to serve peace and to help those in poverty. Pharmaceutical medicine has its place, but no single safety study can assess the cumulative impact of one prescription on top of another prescription and one shot on top of another shot on top of another shot throughout the course of childhood. We just don't do that study right now, and we ought to. We can, and we will. Conditions like autism used to be 1 in 10,000. Now here in the state of California, it is 1 in 22. 1 in 22 children affected. Allergies, obesity, anxiety, depression, our children are not well. Our people are not well, and our country will not be well for very much longer if we don't heed this desperate call for attention. It is not about a new pill or, quote, finding the cure. We know the cure is cleaning up our environment and providing the basic public goods that are the foundational conditions for health and healing. It is about a shift in our priorities. It is about compassion. Chronic disease, addiction, poverty, depression, this is where Americans are hurting the most. It is time for politicians to listen. While Bobby is focused on ending the corporate capture of our regulatory agencies, I am going to assemble the best technologists and scientists in the world, and we will use the latest in AI and computation and examine the health records databases of our nation and those other nations who are also on a quest to solve chronic disease. We will find the answers. As a mother myself who knows the firsthand challenges of raising a child with special needs, I promise to you to make this world a little less crazy. I will work with Bobby Kennedy to make America once again a country of peace, a country of compassion, a country that is prosperous and free. And this won't happen overnight, but I have seen miracles that the human spirit can accomplish. I have seen its resilience, and most importantly, I have seen its capacity to heal. And what is possible for the human being is also possible for our nation. So please, join me and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the healing of America. We've got this. We're gonna do this.
A lot of commentators have focused on the fact that as a candidate herself, she can spend as much of her own money as she wants on the campaign, which will obviously be a benefit to Kennedy going forward because they got to spend a lot just to get on the ballot, let alone get elected. Meanwhile, the major party candidates have all the highly developed financial resources and funding mechanisms of the major parties. So he's quite far behind, and she would help a lot. Now, I don't think that that's her sole recommendation for him choosing her. I'll give you my impressions of her in a moment, but first, Kennedy, some of the things he's had to say about why she picked her makes sense as well. For one thing, that she has an understanding of artificial intelligence and advanced uses of computer technology, that she's interested in solving the problems of chronic illness that have been growing in this country for decades now, that she has some experience with the corruption in the political system, and that comes from her trying to lobby various agencies and office holders and finding how they're unresponsive to her concerns, but more responsive to big corporations and big funders, that she obviously is an intelligent person and shares a lot of his other concerns, such as environmentalism and regenerative agriculture. He also said that her youth is an asset. He was looking for someone to show that he takes seriously the concerns of younger generations. I'm about Kennedy's age. I'm a little bit older. And so to me, she appears young, and to a lot of people in my generation, it would seem, you think, is she have enough life experience or experience in government to run for office? Well, she does have some experience with the government from the outside, not from the inside. And her youth would maybe appeal to younger adults who are the most likely of all the age categories to be supporting Kennedy's campaign. That shows that he's taking them seriously. So my big concerns going into this was simply that her youth and relative inexperience in government, but those are also pluses in a way, right? That, as I said, she can appeal to younger people and show that the campaign is taking those people seriously and their issues seriously, and also that her lack of political experience can be a benefit, because it seems like once people get into office, it's very easy to become adapted to the culture that he's trying to change in the government, which is the kowtowing to these corporate interests all the time. So in some ways, not having political experience is an asset. Obviously, as a lawyer, she understands or should understand our constitutional system. She has some experience in managing programs and being engaged in various forms of political activism to some degree. I'm not sure how much. But so she does have credentials to be doing this. Now, my impression, and I'm going to make a disclaimer here, because she said that her father was of German and Irish ancestry, and my mother was of German and Irish ancestry. In fact, my great-grandmother, her maiden name was Shanahan. So there's a possibility that I am remotely related to Nicole Shanahan, and maybe as a relative, maybe I could ask her for a loan at some point. But so I may be biased that way just because I'm prejudiced towards anyone that's in any way associated with my mother, who I was very fond of. So here's my assessment of her. I was impressed by her poise, her articulateness. I thought the speech, I don't know if she wrote it herself, I assume she had a big hand in it. Her speech was well constructed and well delivered. She did seem a little nervous with her giggles that made her youth stand out, but she seemed very sincere in what she talked about, and a lot of the issues she talked about are dear to my heart as well. Things like having wanting government aid for people who are in financial difficulty, helping them to get through those hard spots, and also, that war is not a good thing. We need to work more on finding the ways of peace than the ways of war. So a lot of those things resonated with me. So I thought she was a good pick in a number of ways. I'm not sure if she's, I don't think she's a negative to the campaign. I'm not sure how much of a positive she is. I think it's kind of a wash, because some people are going to find her too liberal or too young or too inexperienced. Other people are going to think, well, those are pluses in some ways, that she has liberal views, and reassures that Kennedy's still on that side of the spectrum, at least in a lot of issues. So overall, I was impressed by her. Made me feel, and my wife feel as well, that we're more inclined to support the Kennedy ticket after having listened to her. Now, outside the rally, as Politico reported, there was counter demonstrators. Let me try to cue that up so you can see the article where I found this. So at the Kennedy rally where he introduced Ms. Shanahan, there was counter protesters, and they this included, you won't be surprised to hear, the Democratic National Committee funded truck circling around, and then a lot of surrogates standing there to talk to reporters and wave flags against Kennedy and things of that nature. So the Democrats, as I've mentioned before, they have organized a team to dismiss Kennedy's campaign, to work against it, and we see them in action already in this venue and in other ways as well. So it is a good thing for Kennedy to have a vice presidential pick having made even at this early juncture because almost half the states, they want you to list your vice presidential candidate. And even though you can list the stand-in, it's much better to have the actual vice presidential candidate listed on your form and then on the ballot so that people can remember, yeah, this is the team. Otherwise, if you got Kennedy and Zundel, people say, is that really Robert Kennedy and Shanahan, or is that somebody else? So it's better to have the actual candidate than a surrogate. And now we can move forward in a lot of those states. Let me turn to the American Values 2024. They held a fundraiser right after this the rally in Oakland, and in that fundraiser, let me fade out my background so you can focus on that. They raised some money that says $2.1 million. $1 million of that was actually put in by one of the co-funders of AV24, Mark Gorton. And in his comments after this, he gave a little speech, and he had something to say about his. Whoops, I'm queuing up the wrong thing. He had something to say about the future of the American Values 2024 organization.
Through this campaign, this movement has a core and is coalescing. And the network of people that we're putting together, people who want to see Bobby elected president, but want to see the changes that he wants to make and want to see our government return to the principles that it was founded on. And it's going to take a gigantic effort that is going to last far beyond the next 6 or 9 months or 8 years or whatever it is. So the fact that Bobby has put us on this journey has given us an opportunity to build organizations that will last over time. And that is what we are building at AV24. So we are working every day to support Bobby's candidacy, but we're also working to support the building an enduring structure of a movement that can go forward and take the energy of people all across the country to work on these fundamental issues of corruption that no established party wants to tackle.
Now, I found that particularly interesting because in the past I've criticized Cornel West when he moved from the Green Party to being an independent candidate, because as an independent candidate, once your campaign is over, even if you win, so whether you win or lose, all the people who got involved in your campaign and wanted to help support you and the things you said you would do, all that dissipates. The networks dissolve, the momentum stops or stalls, and the fundraising stops, all of that. So there's not a continued presence, and it makes it a lot easier for candidates, if they do get elected, to become more habituated to the political culture, especially in Washington, D.C. So I've always said running with a party is better because even if you lose or win, that party still exists to carry forward your agenda. Try to elect other people to office who are going to work with you to realize that agenda, and elect people into office in the future to carry it forward beyond your term in office if you do win. So the fact that the AV24 organization is seeing itself as something more permanent is interesting to me, and something I would like to know more about and see how it develops. My hesitation, though, is it seems like a very much top-down kind of thing where their rich funders are calling the shots so far. I don't know that this is in any way going to be a organization that's more receptive to grassroots decision-making, maybe participation. They like to have volunteers like all groups do, but are they going to allow people to have a voice? Maybe his We the People party would be a better vehicle for that, even though it was created simply to support his presidential campaign and get him on the ballot in certain states. Maybe that would be a better vehicle for maintaining the initiative, maintaining the momentum of whatever people get involved in this campaign. I mean, the ordinary people, not the millionaires and folks who have a lot of money to donate to this cause, but regular folks that can keep them on track, keep them honest to the principles, keep them even honest is kind of a strong word, assuming that they are sincere in the kind of things they want to work for, keep them in touch with the folks that they say they're trying to benefit. You know, people who are further down the economic ladder that they want to do some good for, get feedback from them, get, their take on the kinds of policies they are promoting or the issues that they're working on or whatever, that kind of thing. So, interesting development. Now, I talked about how it's important to have a vice presidential candidate to get on the ballot in a number of states, and this came up as an issue in Nevada. The Kennedy campaign had already gathered enough signatures to get on the ballot in Nevada, but as it turned out, they refused to accept them because they said, well, we made a mistake. You need to have a vice presidential candidate listed on your petition. Kennedy complained, I think, with good cause, that he was told that he didn't need to have a vice president in order to start petitioning to get on the ballot in Nevada. He even double checked with them when he filled out his paperwork and was to submit it, and got an email reply that he documented saying that he did not need to have a vice presidential candidate named in order to start circulating that petition. So he feels that there's some dirty deed done here. But I took a look at the law in Nevada, and it is quite clear, I think, at least in my opinion. Take a look at it. I've highlighted a relevant passage here. It says to be an independent candidate for the office of president in this state, they must pay a filing fee and then file with the Secretary of State a declaration of candidacy and a petition of candidacy in which the person must also designate a nominee for vice president. And it goes on to say a little bit later that the names of the proposed candidates that's plural, to be placed on the ballot, have to be part of that petition. So it looks pretty clear to me. Now, my experience is that if you get bad information from some government bureaucrat, that is not much of a defense. You need to know what the law is and comply with the law when you are going to get engaged in a political campaign like this. So I'm surprised that Kennedy's lawyers didn't come across that. But Richard Winger of the Ballot Access News felt that the language is actually kind of ambiguous. And if you see on your screen here, those of you who are listening to this can't see it, but it's the passage I read says the declaration of candidacy and a petition of candidacy in which the person must also designate a nominee of vice president. So that does that in which mean it can be either or? They can list it on the declaration of candidacy or the petition? Does it mean it has to be on both? Does it have to be on one in particular? He felt that that was ambiguous. I'm not so sure how ambiguous that was, but in any event, I don't think it's going to help Kennedy very much in the courts. Maybe if they negotiated with the state of Nevada, they could get him to designate his vice presidential candidate in a revised form of the declaration of candidacy, but he's already got all the petitions with signatures on them. So if they throw all that out, he's going to be back to square one in the state of Nevada. There were suspicions expressed by the Kennedy campaign that this was a Democratic trick to get his signatures invalidated or get them so they don't count. They can't be used to get them on the ballot. I'm not so sure of that. It's easy to get bad answers from government employees. It's also very likely that the person who initially responded to him didn't realize he needed to have a vice presidential candidate designated, because the law previous to 1993, I don't know how old the bureaucrat was, but if they'd been around that long, prior to 1993, you did not have to name a vice presidential candidate to circulate petitions to get on the ballot as an independent candidate in Nevada. They changed it in 93 because, of course, in 1992, Ross Perot ran as an independent, and this was instituted, I would say, as a measure to make things more difficult for non-major party candidates, for independent candidates to get on the ballot. Just a little more obstacle, saying, okay, you got to vet candidates for vice president and figure out who you're going to put on the ballot. Even though you can put a surrogate in, it makes the process a little more complicated. So maybe that clerk didn't know that. Maybe they talked to an older employee and they says, yeah, I don't think you need to list a vice presidential candidate. We never have. I don't think there's been any other independent presidential candidates who got very far since Ross Perot to get on the ballot. So it could have been an innocent mix-up, but it is causing him major problems. And I think even if there is no, say, the possibility is there that lawyers with the Democratic Party went and examined the Nevada law to find some provision that contradicted the way he filled out the ballots in order to, the way he filled out, his petitions for gathering signatures, and found a way to get them disqualified from counting to get them on the ballot. I think that's entirely possible that they looked carefully at it and then went to the Secretary of State's office and said, hey, look, there's a problem here. You can't accept these according to law. That's possible. Don't know if that actually happened, but it's possible. But whether it's possible or not, it illustrates the attempts of the parties, because it had to be people from the major parties who passed this law in the first place, and those laws in other states that require an independent candidate to name their vice presidential candidate this early in the process, when major party candidates don't name their vice presidential candidates until later in the summer. And even then, they get on the ballot automatically anyway. They don't have to go gather around gathering signatures. So it creates another obstacle for vice president. It creates another obstacle for independent candidates because, number one, they might make a mistake, like apparently Kennedy's campaign did, and forget to put a vice presidential candidate on it. Kennedy also said there was no space, there was no field to fill in the name of a vice presidential candidate on these petitions. So, where would you do that if you had one? So it's ways to trip you up. You have to spend time, as I said, if you want to settle on your vice presidential candidate early, you got to vet them. You got to spend time thinking about it. You got to set up an event for this instead of spending that time actually collecting signatures or raising money or the other things you could be doing with your time, paying for lawyers to figure out the laws in all these states, that kind of stuff. So it is an obstacle that I think was deliberately placed in the way of candidates, and here it tripped Kennedy up. Whether the current Democratic Party had a hand in that or not, I don't know, but I would be certain that its original passage was a way to trip up candidates for independent candidates for the president. All right, so let's see. I said that attacks on Kennedy had been ramping up, and that is quite true. Let me give you an example of this. Here is a story, if I can cue it up here, in which Politico again had a story about RFK earning money from trusts and investments in oil and gas companies. And of course, he's long been known as an environmentalist, and so he would presumably be aware of carbon pollution and the link with climate change. So there's essentially saying he's hypocritical, that he's not the environmentalist he claims to be. He's a phony. He's the things he says he stands for, he doesn't really stand for, in order to scare away, of course, any Democrats that might want to vote for Kennedy because they think he's more of an environmentalist than Joe Biden. So that's where I think this came from. They didn't say what their source was for this, but I can't imagine a reporter on their own raking through the financial documents just on the hope that maybe they'll find something that seems incongruent with Kennedy's positions on issues. It seems much more likely to me that the person who would have time to rake through that and find something would be someone paid to do that. That is, an opposition researcher paid by the Democratic Party. Probably was examining all of his financial records, all of his submissions to the government in order to find something like that and then feed it to the press as a way of attacking him. What I think of the attack, I think it makes Kennedy look bad, obviously. He should have caught that earlier, and it seemed like he was trying to hide it because it took it. He sold those investments in December, which was well into his campaign. Although I don't think just owning stock in in companies doing bad things is necessarily a sign of bad faith. You know, you buy stocks from other people who hold the stocks. It's not having an effect on the company one way or another in a lot of cases. And it's really hard to figure out if you've got money to invest, where are you going to invest it that's not going to cause some kind of problem. I looked into social investments once my employer's, I qualified for a individual retirement account. It was originally not an individual retirement account, but an investment account and for my retirement. And I looked into social investment funds. If they didn't invest in oil and gas companies, they were investing in things that were supposedly benign, like Facebook and Amazon, that I have problems with as well. So it's very hard to determine which companies have black marks on their record from your perspective. It's easier now that you got these socially conscious, investment vehicles, but you got to pay attention to the fine print about what exactly you are investing in. Somewhere or another, given the nature of capitalism, you're going to invest in something that's going to be detrimental to people somewhere, workers or consumers or the environment or something. So it's going to make you look bad. So I don't think it's as big a deal as they make it out to be. He probably has investment managers who are making those decisions. He probably didn't think to give them directives on this, but it does make him look bad and somewhat hypocritical. And I think the Democrats were behind that. So I'm going to share the blame with Kennedy for not thinking about that earlier and for the Democrats making a big issue out of it and trying to get him, get some of his support eroded. Another way in which I've seen other things lately popping up all the time about negative about Kennedy. One example that I forget where I saw it, but apparently someone in the New York Times had an interview with Kennedy in which they talked about a lot of things, but then they edited the interview so that they, as Kennedy was speaking, they faded it out, and then the interviewer in a voiceover started to give other context regarding things like, whether this is a conspiracy theory or vaccines or whatever it had to be. So they were deliberately manipulating that interview in a way that they could inject an editorial commentary into it, which I haven't heard it, but it sounded very unfair. So you're going to see more and more negative articles in the media, negative stories, negative things of that type. Keep in mind that there's a reason behind these things, that somebody is often feeding these to a reporter for a reason. And a lot of times the media and the reporters are complicit in it because they have the same perspective on Kennedy that liberal elites in general associated with the Democratic Party have, which is that he's an egomaniac, he's off the map in terms of his views, and that he's just going to be a spoiler for Joe Biden. All right, let's turn away from Kennedy. This has been a long show just talking about Kennedy so far. Let's talk about Claudia De La Cruz. So Ballot Access News this week said that, and this was a couple of weeks ago that she achieved this, but she got on the ballot in South Carolina by becoming the nominee of the Workers' Party. Now, Claudia De La Cruz is a candidate. Her main political home is the Party of Socialism and Liberation, and she is running for president and has now qualified for the ballot, or at least got enough signatures or got the nomination of enough parties to get on the ballot in 5 states. Now that's, to me, significant because I wasn't even aware of her until a few weeks ago. And if you see I've put on the screen a chart that I've been keeping of which parties or independent candidates have gotten enough signatures or gotten the nomination of a party in order to get on the ballot. Now that doesn't include states where those signatures are not going to count for one reason or another. But if you look at this, I've added De La Cruz, and she's already on the ballot, or should be on the ballot in 5 states. Cornel West, who I have been covering and who got a lot of media attention, is only on the ballot in 4 states. So it could be that De La Cruz outpaces Cornel West in getting on the ballot and moving forward in her desire to be on the ballot in a number of states as a presidential candidate. So that's it for this week. My voice is starting to fade anyway. Excuse me as I take a little drink. If you like the show, hit the like button. If you want to make sure you don't miss future shows, subscribe, hit the notification, whatever is out there. I've been asking for donations, and I usually put the link at the end of the program description. Some people have said that the link is sometimes broken. I found that to be true. I don't know why. I'm going to try to fix that. I'll let you know in the future, but I'll put the link back in, see if it works. It doesn't take you to any bad place. It just gives you a message saying the link isn't working. Excuse me. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. I'll be here again next week. All things going well. Fingers sort of crossed. And thanks for watching. All right. Bye-bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.